Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. Mind your banner scouting special. Maybe next year we will come up with a more creative name, or maybe a brand name. Who knows? If someone out there wants to sponsor the scouting shows, but we've been putting these together this season, obviously, because Indiana football, it's fair to say, has been drawing more and more interest. And I'm not sure how excited he is to join us. But I am very excited and have been excited for several weeks to welcome my good friend and my old friend, Sean Fitz from On3, who has been kind of in Penn State, media circles for how long? 20 years?
2006, man, is when I started as an intern at Blue White Illustrated. I'm now the publisher there, so I'm pretty cool full circle time. But yeah, there's been a lot that's happened at Penn State in the past. I guess this is my 20th season, so yeah, there's plenty to do, and we kind of usually work on reverse schedules, right? You're just getting into basketball season, I'm just getting out of football season, and that's it's usually that trade-off. And I gotta say, I'm really disappointed you're not staying at my house this weekend, as you often do for all IU events in State College.
I know. I normally drag you to the Bryce Jordan Center for your annual visit. But I won't be making the trip. I will be in Chicago this weekend because Indiana plays Marquette on the Sunday. Mike Neislick, as folks who know I will be trying to avoid having to drive Mike back from Chicago will know. He will be trying to fly in from, I think, Pittsburgh first thing Sunday morning. So he'll be doing the double dip, but I'll be just driving up. You can't see it, by the way. I do have to mention this. His microphone's covering it. But Sean will be I suspect, first and only guest of Mind Your Banners wearing a Queen's Park Rangers branded hoodie. There you go. Up the R's. Sean, I mean, listen, discussions of the championship table aside, I'm sure you have answered this question in a lot of different ways, or at least a lot of different times. But I'll ask you one more. Forgive me. Like, where did this go wrong? I mean, I imagine there's some things you could point to in scheme, maybe talent. It also, I think if anyone who's been in this industry long enough, every once in a while you'll cover a team where it's almost like the pressure just got to be too much. And once the rubber band snapped, nobody could kind of get it back together. Just like, is it a little bit of all of that? Or maybe were there specific things that just kind of triggered this team to just kind of, fall away so far, so fast?
Yeah, I wish there were a smoking gun. It would be a lot easier to explain it like that. But you look at what Penn State had coming into the season, and you could poke holes in some of the spots on the roster. You could poke holes in some of the stuff that they were trying to do with what they had coming back. But the fact of the matter remained that a lot of what you saw coming into the 2025 season, you saw it produce on the field in 2024. You had an offensive line coming back. You had two running backs who were fantastic in the college football playoff last year. So you thought you maybe just road grade your way and high floor your way into winning 10 games, which has kind of been the standard for Penn State the last couple of years. And, you reach a couple of, crossroads there where you get Oregon, you get Ohio State, and now Indiana's on the come up as well. So that's adding a third game into there. But you've kind of found yourself where, like the team's floor was, like 8 wins and a very big disappointment. Now all of a sudden you're 3-5, and that is, like out the window, because nobody at Penn State, outside of that building, thinks that Penn State's going to be 4-5 after this weekend, because Indiana is a unit right now. And that's really what you're looking at. But back to Penn State, you look at all the guys that they got coming back. They won the offseason. They did a great job. I'm a Washington Commanders fan for life. They've won a lot of off seasons since the last time they won a Super Bowl title. And, you just kind of got that feeling that they were on the precipice of something special, and apparently not. And it was just fascinating to see, because you've got guys. I mentioned the offensive line. I mentioned, I mentioned the running backs coming back. Drew Aller was coming back. They got him receivers that were different than what he had last year, which were high upside, high potential receivers. You traded that in for floor and production, and you still haven't gotten floor and production from those guys. And it's just been a wonky operation from top to bottom. You went out, you got Andy Kotelnicki 2 years ago from Kansas as an offensive coordinator. It's not working at all. And it's flatly ugly to watch, because they do a lot of side to side, a lot of motion gimmick stuff. And, when Penn State has played on the front foot, if you will, they've been okay. You look at the last quarter against Oregon. They scored 14 points in the fourth quarter against Oregon, just going straight ahead. You look at the first half against Ohio State, who hadn't given up a touchdown until Penn State did last weekend. Or excuse me, Penn State scored against them last weekend in the first half, and they were just going forward. And it's just you'll see it if you're an IU fan when you watch it Saturday. Penn State will string together a couple good plays, and then last weekend was Liam Clifford, the fifth-year senior receiver, playing. He was emergency quarterback last week, playing a wildcat, playing a gimmick role, and then kind of just shoot yourself in the foot. And that's what you got on offense. On defense, Penn State has had maybe the most consistent defense in the country since 2021, and they brought in Jim Knowles, the national championship winning defensive coordinator, $3 million a year plus, and it has not worked at all. And you look at some of the depth and sort of talent issues that they've got, and just has not grasped the scheme, and the scheme has not grasped them, and they've not met in the middle. So just so many things going wrong. I mean, you look at where Penn State's been, and kind of been the mark of consistency for the last 5 years, because even when they were outside looking in, you're outside looking in with 9 or 10 wins. And that's, in college football, there's something to be said for that, even though we actually like to say that that's a fireable offense in some spots. Now this one just fell apart. Lost to Oregon, turned around, went to UCLA, admittedly faced a UCLA team that they hadn't seen all year on film. That one turned around pretty quick, and it's certainly a nod to Tim Skipper for the job that he's done there, and the new Heisel boy, that was well documented. And then you lose to Northwestern, and it's like you can't apply direct pressure when your limb is severed and you're bleeding out. And that's kind of where it went with James Franklin. Penn State has been okay since, for a situation where you lose your starting quarterback against Northwestern. Drew Aller's out for the year. Bringing a redshirt freshman, Ethan Grunkmeyer, is a talented kid, and then you go on the road and face Phil Parker at night at Kinnick. That's not great. You go to Columbus and play Ohio State. Also not great. And now all of a sudden you've got Indiana, number 2 team in the country, coming in. It's not been a fun stretch for Penn State fans. So it's been a little bit of everything. If you just look at how this kind of came down, nobody saw it coming that far, that fast. And I think it's been really, really remarkable to watch from an observer standpoint, because you go from consistency to an absolute dumpster fire, and that's it's alarming.
Is it? And I guess this is a little bit of a question about like the vibe around this game too, right? But you talk about the last 2 games in particular. I know that it feels like when we tell the 10 years from now story of this season, it's going to be Oregon, UCLA, Northwestern. But for this team right here, right now, the story of like what Indiana is preparing for feels like it's much more about Iowa and Ohio State. Of course, the difference is Penn State is going to be home this weekend, rather than at Kinnick, rather than at the Horseshoe. Is there at least some sense locally? Because I mean, listen, I've been around these seasons. We've all been around these seasons, whether it's football or it's basketball, where once blood stops flowing to it, like that's it. And nobody shows up. There's no emotion. There's like, is there any sense of, hey, let's pull together and see if we can't salvage something from this season, starting with a game like this, because Indiana is, the playoff rankings debuted last night. Indiana would be a major scalp. Indiana's, this is probably going to be, I would assume the most NFL scouts that are going to be at a Penn State game between now and the end of the season, both for Penn State and potentially for Indiana. Like, is there any sense, whether it's in the fan base, whether you maybe sense it within the team itself, that it's like, hey, we can kind of dig our feet in and start making a bit of a stand here? Or is this one of those seasons where you just feel like the air is already too far out of the balloon?
Yeah, I think the apathy has really kicked in for Penn State fans. You take a look at where our analytics are on our site, and most of it's coaching search functional. It's like, yay, great, wonderful column on the game. I think it's really well written, but nobody cares. And that's kind of where they're at with that. Now, I'm judging from our listeners and readers on Blue Whale Illustrated and our show on YouTube. But yeah, it's been a lot of forward focus. And I think there's a macro and a micro forward focus, because you do have that 3-game stretch with Iowa, with Ohio State, and with Indiana. But on the back end of that, you can come out of that 3-6 and you face Michigan State, Nebraska, and Rutgers. So there's a path to 6-6. I don't know how the team feels about a bowl game. I don't know how the fan base would feel about a bowl game, because Penn State's fan base has played in a lot of, or has traveled to a lot of bowl games. They've done the New Year's Six thing probably more than anybody in the last 10 years. It always seemed to land on that, spin the wheel and land on that. But you're also looking at a fan base that's really centered on the future right now, and kind of questioning how all that's going to come about, because you've got a coaching search with no sure thing. You've got 6 games into the season, you fire your coach to set yourself up and give yourself a runway for the next couple of weeks or months or whatever it may be. But the fact remains, James Franklin won a lot of games at Penn State, and it's going to be tough for the next guy. And this is not a replacing the legend type thing. This is coming after this guy. Your standards are, we fired him because he's not going to win the big games and win a national championship, which is telling your fan base, we have expectations of winning a national championship. Now, where this roster is and where this roster is going to be in January, February, probably very different stages right now. But there's still some talent on there. You know, you talk to coaches around the conference and they still say that there's talent to be had at Penn State. And whether all that is functional right now remains to be seen. But I think there's kind of a get over this mountaintop right now, whether it be a win or a loss. And I think most are expecting a loss. I'm expecting a loss. But then setting yourself up for the home stretch, which is where you kind of find your character, where you kind of find those younger guys that can step up and maybe do something down the stretch. I think that's probably an accurate depiction of where Penn State fans are at this point. Like I said, it's very future focused right now.
I think if there is like, and I'd say this, you know, you talk about kind of as neutral observers, but certainly I think if you talk to an Indiana fan, of course, Curt Cignetti is going to describe opponents this way. It does feel like there is, at very least, an athletic level that Indiana is going to see in Penn State. You talk about the running backs, you talk about probably both lines of scrimmage, but certainly that offensive line. And I'm not trying to demean Wisconsin or Purdue, but I think it feels like this is kind of the last hurdle for Indiana to a meaningful hurdle for Indiana to a 12-0 season and a spot in Indianapolis. I guess, I mean, I can't think of a more artful way to ask this question than simply to say, do you still think that there's going to be Penn State's going to be one of the programs that still recruits at an athletic level that Indiana historically has not? And of course, some of that imbalance can be flattened by the portal or by player development. We've seen the success that Curt Cignetti and his staff have had the last 2 years in those areas. But do you think that is still something that eventually could, especially on the road, and especially if Penn State can maybe grab a couple of early scores, get the crowd involved, you know, get a sort of sense of belief into itself, that's something that can be a little bit more of a hurdle for a team like Indiana? Or again, and I ask you this as someone who watches Indiana from 10,000 feet rather than 10, am I maybe underestimating Indiana a little bit in your mind?
I think those are two very different questions, because you look at so Penn State played a garbage out of conference schedule. Like it was FIU, Nevada, and
we're familiar with those.
Villanova.
I don't know if you've listened to Paul Feinbaum at all in July, but
right. But my point on those is you're playing a Division I athlete. You're playing a guy on scholarship at Nevada who is a better athlete than what than going half speed against your own team in practice. And there's always that aspect to it. And then you take levels to this, and you think that where Penn State has recruited, which has been top 15-ish or right around 15 for the last several years, very consistent, they're going to have athletes. And I know that it's different in different parts of the country. It's different from different wavelengths of tiers of football, if you will. But Penn State's still in that athletic tier where they've got a lot of athletes on this team. And we were having a conversation on our show earlier this week. It's like, yeah, Penn State's corners were sufficiently cooked by Ohio State. But it's not because they're not fast. It's not because they're not athletic. They don't play particularly fast right now. I think there's some scheme imbalance there that is keeping guys from really playing as fast as they can. And you look at going back to the defenses the last couple of years, especially with Manny Diaz, they missed fast. And that's really what you're looking at. But back to my last point, yes, there's going to be athletes all over the field. Whether or not those are being used to the best of their abilities and the best of their athletic abilities, that's another question. I think a lot of Penn State fans have that question right now, based on the schemes, based on the amount of money that you spent on coordinator hires, coaching staff hires. Brought in Stan Drayton from Temple. He was the head coach, but he won a national championship with Texas as a running backs coach. So like this is a staff that is well compensated, well thought of. This is a team that has been recruited, and they've done the portal okay, not great. But yeah, you're still going to get that level of athleticism. Now, do you have the level of drives for a 3-5 team or 3-5 team versus a team that should be competing for a playoff spot at this point? That's up in the air right now. They haven't quit. They've certainly looked better against Iowa and Ohio State than they did against UCLA and Northwestern. I think they put so much into, and this is kind of spinning off on another tangent here. I think they put so much into Oregon, the whiteout at home, the rematch of the Big Ten title game from last year. So much went into that. And then when you lost in double overtime, which was a game that, Penn State was got a bit lucky to get to overtime, not gonna lie. But then had the lead in overtime, almost got a bounce for a fumble by Dante Moore that could have, if that bounces a yard to the left and Penn State recovers it, James Franklin's probably here still. Like you're looking at so many like these little things that have gone wrong. So yes, Penn State, if they come out, they play a complete game, they play the game that they've wanted to play all season but have yet to play, then yes, I think that opportunity is there. From what you're saying about Indiana, I think it's very fascinating to look at the Ohio State game last week and look at Ohio State all season. And that's a team that is, when you play Northwestern and you always hear they're going to shorten the game by running the clock down, by doing all this stuff. And whether it's, I guess, Northwestern basketball, football, whatever it may be, you're going to take the air out of the football. Ohio State does a sufficient job of that themselves. And Ohio State's going to end up at the end of the season playing basically from a snap count perspective, a full game less than everyone else, maybe 2 games less than everyone else. So you're not seeing these rampant, run them up scores from Ohio State. I think they've only been over 40 points twice this year, which is pretty insane when you think about all the talent on the roster. And Julian Sayin, by the way, is freaking awesome. But you've got that sort of natural ability to score 38 points, but still look dominant doing it. Indiana, on the other hand, has been running it up. I mean, they've been very, very efficient. They've been scoring a lot. And hey, I think there's something here that Curt Cignetti has a statement to make about Penn State. I don't think he's the biggest Nittany Lions fan out there. We'll say that he's from Pittsburgh, but he's more Pittsburgh, West Virginia guy. I know you're going to do your accent here at some point, but you're looking at. Is that just for the private phone calls? Okay.
Yeah, no, we're not going to bring the Yinzer accent out. I mean,
it's talk about the 72 Steelers. Okay.
No, it's funny you say that because I mean, Indiana, like the flip side is I think Fernando Mendoza's attempted 9 passes in the fourth quarter in the games that weren't Old Dominion, which was closer than it should have been, and then Iowa and Oregon. Like Indiana has done that too. It's just that, I mean, basically, and maybe this feeds into something I want to ask you about Penn State. Indiana is on the ground what I thought Penn State was going to be this year, essentially. And I wanted to ask you about kind of the relationship to the ground game and what's going wrong there, because what's allowed Indiana in those games that we're talking about, Illinois, UCLA, Maryland, where for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, they put in backups and they stop throwing the ball, is they still run the ball so well.
Right.
And that was what, I mean, I think we all thought, as good as Drew Aller was, that's what it felt like was really going to underpin Penn State this season. And yet they've only rushed for 200 plus as a team twice. That was against FIU and Villanova. They weren't bad against Iowa, something Indiana kind of was at times, frankly, running the football. But just in general, like what has not worked with the way Penn State, with the talent of those running backs and the experience of that offensive line, that Penn State has just not been able to run the ball.
Yeah, I think Penn State's kind of gone to Katron Allen a little bit more in the last couple of weeks. And when I say I think, I mean the numbers bear it out. Now they were pretty much even in carries at one point. Now Katron's got 119, Nick Singleton's got 82. Nick Singleton just has not been the running back that many painted him to be. You look at his elusive score, it's very low. This is a guy that almost plays like a like a fullback. He's always looking for contact. He does not make guys miss. When he gets into the open field, yes, he can run a 4.37 or whatever, but he has not gotten into the open field and given himself a chance to run away from people. I mean, this is a guy who was a true freshman, had an 89-yard run against Utah in the Rose Bowl. Like that is what you expected to see for the rest of time with Nick Singleton, but he's not elusive at all. And he's not a make you miss type guy, which is the exact same thing said twice. What Penn State's done better with him this year, the last couple of weeks, is getting him out in space, maybe getting him in the passing game a little bit more, because I think that's where he's most effective. He's almost a guy that you could, double as a receiver, double as just a guy to get out of the outside the hashes and really get some work done. Katron Allen's been much better just from a down to down perspective. He's been more efficient. He's not going to, well, he did have a 67-yard run earlier this year, but he's not going to be the guy that runs away. It's so funny to look at the sort of the juxtaposition of what Allen is and what Singleton is. And you think Singleton's this home run back, but he's got to get past the first and second wave, and he hasn't done that. And he hasn't had the home run where where Allen has longer runs. But Singleton is actually a decent inside runner, which you look at him and you think he's probably 195 pounds. He's actually close to 225, 230 at this point. So it's been fascinating to see sort of how those two are viewed, how those two are used, and how this offensive line, who you expected to just road grade people based on what we saw in the playoff last year, based on what you saw, people are going to throw SMU and Boise at Penn State, and that's fair, whatever. That's not here, but they ran the ball fairly successfully against Notre Dame in the playoff semifinals, and in the Big Ten championship game ran for 260 or something like that against Oregon. So it's been
what a first round defensive tackle. Like, I mean, we were both at that game. Like, they were really, really good.
It's mind boggling to think about how far that running game has been, or how much that running game has been stifled based on going back to what I said at the start of the show. You've seen it in person. It has worked in person before, and now it's gone away. And now it's pretty crazy to think about how far this one has fallen. And the run game is sort of right in line with there. A lot of east to west stuff. You looked at what they did in the non-conference, and there was a lot of different schemes, of different running approaches from Andy Kotelnicki. And, asking around, they're like, yeah, they're trying a lot of stuff to get better at it. So when they get to Oregon, they can figure all this stuff out. And, there's always they're holding this stuff back or whatever. No, it wasn't really the case. They were doing a bunch of stuff. And then they tried to do a bunch of different stuff against Oregon, and it flatly didn't work. And this running game it's been frustrating to watch because you've seen it in the past. And honestly, I wish I could put my finger on it, because that is a group that should be better. And that's the running backs, that's the tight ends blocking, that is the quarterback run. And I think you probably give yourself a little bit more flexibility with Ethan Grunkmeyer in there, but it's never been an offense that's been solely around the quarterback run. But it's really interesting, man, when you take a look at college football, how much that quarterback run means, and how much that quarterback ability to just make something and just be a threat, really, more than anything, opens it up for a guy like Katron Allen, for a guy like Nick Singleton.
Should ask about the quarterback, Ethan Grunkmeyer, redshirt freshman, right? He's it's his second season. It's his third start. I mean, you're going to make life a lot easier on a young quarterback if you can run the ball. But just like, what is maybe different about him? What are basically, if Penn State can put him in some positions to succeed, what do you think his strengths are right now as a quarterback? Obviously recognizing that we don't have nearly as much sort of, data sample on him as we do somebody like Drew Aller.
Yeah, welcome to college football, kid. First trip is to Kinnick at night to play Phil Parker. Then you get Ohio State, and now you get Indiana. Shout out Ole Adams. No, I mean, it's really tough for him, because there's an element of, hey, let's see what the kid's got down the stretch. But there's also the element of, we want to win these football games, so we kind of got to hide him. And that's not great, because I think it's kind of been the Penn State mantra for quarterbacks for a while, is just to be a cog in the machine rather than be the machine. And you look all over the country, you got guys like Diego Pavia that are the machine. And it's Haynes King. I almost didn't mention Georgia Tech on here for you, but guys like that who are just the centerpiece of it. And you're throwing a redshirt freshman in there. Yes, you're trying to protect him. You're trying to get him there. He was pretty accurate in the first week with the short passing game, which was always kind of a Knoblockian mental block for Drew Aller. He was never consistent in hitting those short passes.
That's one for the teenagers, by the way.
Yeah.
Chuck Knobloch reference in here.
Yeah, well, we gotta keep the young ones coming back to mind and manners. But no, you're looking at a situation where he was good with the short passing game. It's just Penn State's receivers, I don't think, have done much in terms of a yak perspective, and the tight ends have not been what Penn State hoped they would be. Luke Reynolds, they thought coming out, and he started the season really well, just has not been that guy. And they've tried to treat him like Tyler Warren. Nobody out there is Tyler Warren, and that's been a great get for Indianapolis, by the city of Indianapolis, by the way, because he's an awesome. I say kid, but he's an awesome guy too. But they've tried to use him in situations where they did with Warren last year, and you see what kind of alien he is. You saw what kind of alien that Abdul Carter was, and that those two guys. This roster is not that much different than the one that went to the college football playoff semifinals last year, except for those two guys and middle linebacker Kobe King, a couple other guys. But yeah, you saw the power that those guys had and the skill that they had to change the games. It's been pretty disappointing when you take a look at the rest of the roster and how they've responded.
We do want to circle kind of for a landing here, but I didn't want to get out without talking about the defense. Obviously that was a talking point through the offseason, bringing Jim Knowles in from Ohio State. And it just strikes me, when you think about what you expected from Penn State defenses, there was always a disruptive defensive back. There was always a really good pass rusher. You were always going to have to fight for your life at the line of scrimmage. And then when you think about, and Indiana fans will remember not very fondly, playing Jim Knowles' defense at Ohio State last year, it felt like you just got slowly suffocated over the course of 4 quarters, that maybe your scripted drive would be fine and maybe you'd move the ball a little bit here and there, but they'd find your snap count, they'd time up your silent count, whatever. It just strikes me like I looked at these while we were talking, the last 3 games, 8 tackles for loss, only 2 sacks. I don't think they have a sack in either of their last 2 games. They're very mid-pack in terms of turnovers forced. It always felt like Jim Knowles' defenses just created, I think, what the modern term that we love in football is havoc. And it just feels, and correct me if I'm wrong, like this one just has not been able to do that. And I don't know if that's a function of, you mentioned earlier, maybe players not finding the scheme, but also the scheme not finding the players, and maybe, it being a little bit too layered or whatever, or if it is just reflective of a season that's kind of gone sideways. But just what hasn't been there for Penn State defensively, albeit, listen, the UCLA game was bad and Ohio State's going to do what they're going to do in Columbus, but it's not like they have been just, sort of cataclysmically bad. That's not a word. You know what I'm trying to say. In every game this season, they just have not been maybe what we expected them to be.
Penn State's standard for defense over the last 5-6 years has been unbelievable. Like I said coming into, so you look back at Penn State's 2016 Big Ten championship, and that's a defense that gave up somewhere in the high 20s because they were always playing shootout. McSorley and Barkley, all those guys, they were playing shootout games. Usually that would go to the, you get to halftime and then you turn it on in the second half and those scores would go up. And Penn State fans embraced it because that was a fun style of football to watch. And then Manny Diaz gets to town and Tom Allen's there. And you've got, you're talking about averaging 11 points a game or something like that given up. And that's elite. It's been elite for a long time. And Penn State fans grew comfortable with where they were at. And so any number above 16, 17 points, it was going to take some time for people to get on board with that. Okay. So there's that. And then they start giving up 45 to UCLA. They start giving up all these big chunks to teams that aren't, frankly, just okay offenses, not great offenses. And the walls have just come tumbling down. 17 points in regulation against Oregon, who's a pretty good football team. But after that, it just kind of went to hell. And you look up front and you start with the defensive lineman. You expected Zane Durant and Denai Dennis Sutton to maybe be All-American type guys this year. They've flatly disappeared. Like there was nothing to write home about. Those guys came back, were well compensated to do so, came back, and it's been kind of a disaster up front. I've talked to some folks that have coached against Penn State in the last couple of years, and you look at the front four and how much it means to Jim Knowles' defense. You look at how much it meant for Ohio State last year, and Penn State flatly does not have the bodies up front. They do not have the physicality up front. Penn State has been bodied a lot, and that's not something you're used to hearing, because even years when their defenses are good, not elite, they're still a physical football team up front. And I think when you take a look at the difference between playing Ohio State and playing Indiana, Indiana's run game is fantastic, and they're going to come right at you. And Penn State is not built for that. And then on top of that, Penn State has been kind of bad on third downs, getting off the field. And a lot of that has been quarterback runs, a lot, not so much design quarterback runs. But Nico at UCLA just kind of played recess ball. drop back on third downs, and all of a sudden he's got 15, 20 yards in front of him where no Penn State defenders are residing. And that's it's got to be pretty fun to run around and do that. And they seem to have a lot of fun upsetting Penn State that weekend. So the mobile quarterback has been it has been a shortcoming for Penn State for a while, but it's really, really just kind of magnified this year. So you've got your front four who are not as physical. You've got your linebackers who Tony Rojas was an all Big Ten, going to be an all Big Ten linebacker, tore up his knee in practice the week after the Oregon game. That one tumbled down the road. And that's a big deal. That is a big deal because that is your green dot wearer. That is your guy that is, getting everybody in the right spot. And it is a guy that runs sub 4.4 that can clean up a lot of messes. Him and Amari Campbell, who was a North Carolina transfer, pretty good combination there at linebacker. You sub in Dom DeLuca, great story, Northeast PA kid, walk on, all that kind of stuff, does not have the same abilities that those guys have. And so it kind of falls apart from there. You move back to the secondary. The corners weren't tested really until Ohio State, and they got burned in Ohio State. There's just a lot going on here. So it's very segmented from the front to the back. And as you mentioned, no havoc, no pressure. Penn State had one tackle for loss in the game that they held Oregon to 17 points in regulation. One tackle for loss. That hadn't happened, I don't think since 2015, maybe at Penn State, which is kind of ridiculous. But you just look at how far this one's fallen. And I still think Jim Knowles is a really, really bright, smart defensive coordinator who has done a lot of really good things and proven that over the years. And Penn State has found themselves in position to make plays, and they just have not finished. So whether it be a schematic thing, whether it be a talent depth type thing, it doesn't matter. Penn State's not getting it done. And really in the run game has been kind of the biggest folly for them over the last couple of weeks.
Wrapping up here, and thank you again, Sean Fitz from On 3 Sports and Blue and White Illustrated. I'm not saying that wrong, right?
Blue white. There's no N. Just like there's no R in Fritz. There's no N. Yeah.
There you go. I didn't say Fritz. I said Fitz. Calm down.
I've been getting Fritz all my life. It's just it's
I get a lot of Osterman, and I always tell people that's how it's actually supposed to be pronounced because the German word for east is Ost. But we don't need to get into my family's history here. Just to kind of, put a bow on this. I think it's pretty clear where you see this matchup this weekend. And I'm not asking for necessarily a specific prediction, more just kind of the idea. Do you think there is a path for Penn State? Because again, Indiana gets Wisconsin the weekend after this, then they get a bye, then they're at Purdue. All that we've learned about this team from the last 2 years, frankly, tells us they should win both of those games. This feels like kind of maybe there is a bit of symbolic sort of importance to it as well. Indiana's never won in State College. They've only beaten Penn State twice. They've only beaten them in front of fans once. But do you think there is any, realistic path, I guess, for for Penn State to win this game? Do you think this is maybe just another game where you talk about it's almost like you've got to get the other side of this gauntlet, and then maybe Penn State can pick itself up and try to sort of play for pride through the end of the year?
Yeah, I think it's both because in today's college football with the parity and what we've seen with, the sort of the NFL mindset where it's going to take, most teams are going to lose a couple of games rather than having 6 or 7, 11-1 teams anymore, or, maybe eventually getting a 9-3 team in the playoff. Like we're heading toward that direction. So it is an anybody can beat anybody situation. I don't really see it playing out that way this weekend, but you've got a team that's been very good at home for the most part over their last decade or so, with a lot of talent, as you mentioned, speed and and possibly an effort mentality, and that's always dangerous, But you got to keep it close in the first half, and you got to sort of, as we said about Northwestern, shorten the game a little bit, sit on the ball a little bit, trying to make it so that your drive scoring percentage goes up, where maybe your scoring percentage or maybe your scoring average stays the same. Like just take fewer drives or take some drives away from Indiana. So I think that's your path right there. Getting key stops. Penn State's been not good on third downs. Whether Mendoza can scramble and make things happen, that's for you to analyze. But it's going to be a part of this this very frustrating roller coaster that Penn State fans have been on for the most part in the last month. It's actually 6 weeks.
Hey, Sean Fitz, On 3 Sports, Blue White Illustrated. Thank you again, Sean, so much for joining us. Thank you all for listening. If you've been watching on the YouTube channel. As always, thank you for doing that. We will be back with our regularly scheduled Mind Your Banners on Thursday. We wanted to wait until the basketball openers had happened so we could talk a little bit of hoops, because it is indeed still basketball season after all.
Never get away from hoops there, huh?
Nope,
Never
never
get away
ever.
from hoops.
Although you'd be surprised how recoded this place has become for football in the last 2 years.
That's great, man. That's great. And you didn't ask me about the coaching search, but I gotta say I kind of hate Indiana right now because everyone thinks that Kurt Cignetti is like the rule, like how this all works. And this guy came in and it's just like a tornado ripping through there, and he's very much the exception. But fans are fanatics for a reason, and Indiana has become the expectation for Penn State fans. And I think that is a very dangerous way to think about how that is all going to play out. But that's just my parting shot there, because it's been really, really impressive for what Kurt Cignetti has done since coming from James Madison and sort of, just reinvigorating everything. It's been really cool to watch.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Sean, for jumping on. This has been Mind Your Banners scouting special for November 5th, looking at Penn State. We will be back on Thursday with our regular show. We'll talk to you soon.